Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. There's a lot to talk about in aviation. Let me talk first about supply. It seems that it's a shortage, actually, of new fuel-efficient jets rather than demand that is aviation's #1 issue. I mean, that's pretty incredible. Did you see this coming?
Without a doubt, and Akbar and myself have been around the industry for a very long time. We had our COVID moment when we wondered whether there would ever be a demand for airplanes. Fortunately, the healthcare profession got us out of that situation faster than most of us expected. And then the re-ramp and the desire to travel has never been greater. And the industry is struggling with how to respond to that demand in a very significant way. And so I can see supply constraints for a very long time.
What's a very long time?
Well, in our world, you know, we have backlogs that go out 5, 6 years. And so if the backlogs would suggest supply constraints that far, that means it's even further. Our job is to resolve them and increase our rates so that we can meet all the demands, but today, supply constraints sort of dictate.
Mr. Lacqua, what does that mean of how you run the airline? So what does it mean for orders, and how does it change the equation going forward?
First and foremost, we have orders. We don't place it, yesterday. we place it very much in advance, and because of the supply chain constraint that my friend Dave just mentioned, we too are suffering as an airline because they need to produce airplanes, they need to get their supplies. We need to run an airplane, operate an airplane, and an airplane is very intense in spares and supplies to fly those airplanes safely. And we have a lot of constraints. We have, at times, airplanes grounded because there is lack of engine parts. Sometimes there is lack of avionics because our orders that have been placed maybe a year ago has not been delivered as yet. And this all is the consequences of the pandemic that happened first time in a century, and we were very ill prepared. And now, because there was such long lockdowns and people got paid for staying at home, half of them, they don't want to come to work.
So what does that mean for travel demand?
Well, as you can see, the consequences of that, not only on aviation industry, but all over the industries that depend on human resources.
We saw that Ryanair order, which was quite incredible. Do you see any other orders well into like 2033? Are they just going to get longer and longer as people try and put orders in faster and quicker?
Yeah, it's demand is stimulated by two things, and it's pretty simple. First is, do people want to travel? We're all experiencing a reboom in travel, particularly with respect to tourism. Business travel's not yet back, but it is steadily progressing, and I have very little doubt that it will. So that's number one. Number two, and the thing that strikes an even bigger demand on the airplane providers, is fear that you're not going to get an airplane. So Qatar Airways has been good and has been ahead of most of the ordering patterns for years and years and years and years. This isn't a new phenomena, but not everybody is. And if you get a little bit behind, you have to place an order for an airplane 6 years later. It strikes fear, which means anybody else who wants to wait that long, I mean, all of a sudden they start lining up. And I think we have a little bit of that going on.
So do these market dynamics, were they behind the decision also to not start this all-clean new airplane that would counter the A321neo?
No, all clean as in sustainable?
As in, no, as in like new from scratch.
Oh, no. I've been in aviation for several decades. Every new airplane family, the requirement to make the billions and billions of dollars of investments is that it be at least 20%, if not 30% better than the last airplane. We will do that, but we have to prove out the technology suite that will deliver that before we design the airplane. And I think in our industry, because of some of the constraints, both in propulsion and the design of the wing, it's going to be at least until the mid-2030s before we, and in this case, I'm just going to assume my competitor, will call out that airplane.
I would like to give him some advice, but I will keep myself constrained. So I don't become very controversial.
Yes, I get lots of that advice.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Oh, you know, the best piece of advice in this industry, in my view, is to keep the medium and the long term in mind, because that's how this industry was formed. Develop, mature technologies, one step at a time, and then introduce really important, groundbreaking airplanes.
I know you give advice. What was the best piece of advice you've given, actually?
Well, you know that, like Dave mentioned, it takes a long time to develop a new type of airplane. They have just developed the 787s, they developed the 777X, Airbus developed the Neo, they developed the 350, the 330 Neos. But you know, these are all on an old technology platform. Yeah. And my advice as a CEO would be to both of them that now they need to start looking now, not wait for one to start before the other starts, to start looking at a new platform that will be sustainable and will be acceptable to the general public who are making unnecessary noise about emissions from the types of airplanes we operate today, though the general public don't realize that aviation is only responsible for 2.6% of the global emission, CO2 emissions. But we are right at the top of the criticism chain. So it is very important that both aircraft manufacturers, actually the third one too, which is Embraer, the Brazilian company, should now think about introducing something new into the industry.
Because that would make your life easier if you're cutting emissions and there'd be more people flying, or?
Well, I don't have to worry about the life being easier for me because it will be after my time. Like he said, it will take 10 years. So I don't plan to be in this job.
Is it more expensive to be more sustainable? Does it drive up prices? Will it drive aviation prices overall?
I think it will in the interim years. First of all, we can prioritize what would achieve net zero in 2050 for large commercial airplanes. Really, the only significant contributor by way of change in technology is sustainable aviation fuel. That's the only thing that moves the needle between now and then. There will be advanced technologies, hydrogen included, that have a reasonable chance of delivering sustainable aviation in the second half of this century. And there will be a lot of development that will work toward that end. But in the meantime, and I think Akbar accurately said this, every new airplane that we or our competitors sell today, if it displaces an older airplane in their fleet, is usually 20 to 30% better on emissions. We have to continue that trend with every next airplane. But we've been on a good run. I think we'll stay on a good run. But the only thing that achieves net zero is sustainable aviation fuel.
And this is why we keep on buying new airplanes, keeping the average age of our airplane the youngest in the industry, is to keep growing, but at the same time not increasing the emission that we are producing from our airplanes. But again, I don't think that we will be able to achieve net zero emission by 2050. Everybody's talking about it, but let us be realistic. There is not enough production of sustainable aviation fuel. The hydrogen project is in its infancy. People also, they don't know what the hydrogen fuel will generate when it is flying at high altitude, what the water vapor coming out from the engines will do at high altitude when they freeze. And in addition to this, as Dave just mentioned, that the hydrogen technology will mature in the second half of this century, means after 2050, which means we will not achieve what everybody is being promised that it will happen. I am very skeptical about this.
And in terms of demand, Mr. Akbar, how do you think that will change in terms of travel for leisure, business, but also cargo?
People will travel. People will still depend on aviation because it plays such a large part of our lives that we cannot do without it for business, for leisure, for trade, for economic development. There is no other alternative than aeroplanes. I know that in one of the climate conferences, this Finnish young girl wanted to prove to the world that they don't need aeroplanes, that they can use a boat, and she arrived in this conference in a boat. But where did she start the journey of the boat? And how did she get there? Majority of the distance she covered was by an aeroplane, because she couldn't come that distance by a boat in the time she wanted to be there. So I don't want to criticize her, but what I'm trying to say is that we have to be realistic about this whole scenario about sustainable flights that people would take.
Okay, and I want to talk about China and also demand from China, but can you update us on the latest snarl to the 737 production? How long will that take?
Turns out to be, again, a reasonably brief and momentary delay at an incredibly inopportune time, because seasonal demand for many of our airline customers was peaking. But it probably will end up deferring maybe a month or a month and a half of production, which will be quickly recovered. So nobody likes these things when they happen, but I think it's short news.
Yeah, Ryanair was also saying that some of the MAX deliveries for the second quarter were delayed by 4 to 5 weeks.
Yes.
Is that a good benchmark of what we should
Yes, it is.
repair?
Yeah, Ryanair experienced that. I think they put it in the right kind of long-term perspective as not being that critical. But in the airline industry, you serve flyers every day, all day. You hear them when they're not happy, and this caused that.
Mr. Akbar, how do you see actually demand from China changing? So I know you're also adding routes to Qatar Airways.
China is a very important market, not only for Qatar Airways, but for the entire aviation industry, both for him as an aircraft manufacturer and for me as an airline. China, the demand, they just opened, and I can tell you already that not only that our airplanes out of China are absolutely packed, during COVID, it was also packed because, okay, we only could operate 2 or 3 flights a week. Now that the lockdown has ended in China, there is a huge appetite for the Chinese to travel out of China, and not only that they are paying me the fares that I'm asking due to the lack of capacity available to them, but also the amount of money they spend in our duty-free at the airport is more than any other nationality. So you can see how much potential the Chinese market has for the international aviation industry, and at the same time for the retail trade all around the world where they travel.
When you look at the priorities, so I don't know whether it's, I imagine it's supply chain first, but then energy transition second. How do you look at the next 3-4 priorities for Boeing in the coming 10 years?
Priority 1 for the 2 airplane manufacturers is stability. We have to resolve the supply chain issues and the surprise associated with it. And we have to resolve it sort of once and for all. That is not a short-term job. It sounds like it might be, but I think it's going to take all of this year and probably all of next year before we can get to that moment where then we can begin to really ramp up our rates, meaning the number of airplanes we produce every month, to meet the demands of this growing customer set. So that's job one. Sustainability is, it has been a priority. It has to remain a priority. It is not something different than the airplanes that we serve up today. As I said, fleet renewal is a critical part of sustainability. Those who can maintain young fleets and continue to update, they stay ahead of everybody, and they set the standard for emissions per passenger, per seat. I'll just, a case in point, the 777. We will introduce the last round of the 777 in 2025. Akbar, Qatar Airways has been a wonderful sponsor and customer for it, along with many other in the world. This airplane does with 2 engines what 2 former airplanes did with 4 each, 747 and the A380. And so that 777 is a major step forward in that market on both efficiency and emissions. It was a development began in the late 90s. And the final and most important version will be delivered in 2025. So it just shows, I think, the cycles, the commitment to see things through, the technologies that have to be incorporated, but that's what it takes.
We have a question from the audience, which is, David, how can we ensure that we prevent cases like MH370 disappearance, and how did that impact demand for the 777?
Well, I don't think there's any connection other than the industry's commitment for all things safety, to learn and understand about everything that goes wrong, and we just experienced that in full transparency, and everybody knows. What do? The industry rallies around that to learn everything they can conceivably learn and to take a step forward on safety in every case. And our industry's track record, Boeing's track record, I'm proud to say, always gets better. With respect to the 777, the demand is outstanding. I expect it to get more outstanding, as again, it's really the only airplane that flies in that category.
What's your
Let me comment, because I read the question, and we are a big 777 operator. You cannot ask the industry or the airline what they will do so that this 777 MH case is not repeated again. Nobody knows what happened. There is no proof that there was anything wrong with the aeroplane. So any type of aeroplane, it be a Boeing or an Airbus, you cannot really know until you find out the data recorders to what happened. So it is really impossible. 777 is a very safe airplane. We fly with absolute 0 incidents, leave alone talking about accident. So it is a very difficult question for the public to know, because there is no evidence that there was a malfunction of the airplane.
Yep.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.